Welcome back to Morning Joe. A 2018 poll from the Pew Research Center asking faith groups whether the U.S. has a responsibility to accept refugees found that more than 2/3 of white evangelicals believed America does not have a responsibility. 25% say the country does. That number is far lower than other faiths and the religiously unaffiliated. In The Atlantic, Peter Wehner writes in a piece entitled "The Deepening Crisis in Evangelical Christianity." There's a very high cost to our politics for celebrating the Trump style. But what is most personally painful to me as a person of the Christian faith is the cost to the Christian witness. Nonchalantly jettisoning the ethic of Jesus in favor of a political leader who embraces the ethic of might makes right. The strong should rule over the weak. Justice has no intrinsic worth. Moral values are socially constructed and subjective is troubling enough. But there is also the undeniable hypocrisy of people who once made moral character and especially sexual fidelity central to their political calculus and who are now embracing a man of boundless corruptions. Don't forget, Trump was essentially named an unindicted co-conspirator in a scheme to make hush money payments to a porn star who alleged she had an affair with him while he was married to his third wife, who had just given birth to their son. While on the Pacific Coast last week, I had a lunch with Carol Kopak, whom I've known for many years and who has played an important role in my Christian pilgrimage. In speaking about the widespread reflexive evangelical support for the president, Kopak lamented the effect this moral freak show is having, especially on the younger generation. We're losing an entire generation. They're just gone. It's one of the worst things to happen to the church. With us now, reporter for the Washington Post, Eugene Scott. And Eugene, I mean, this is something that, you know, we saw, I guess I have to say it's mildly now with Bill Clinton, with the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, and it had an impact on a generation of teenagers and, you know, what the meaning of is and all that. I'm not going to relive it. This is something completely different. There's a lack of care about any core here. And is it possible that this presidency is impacting the evangelical community and taking away their core values?
Absolutely. And Peter Wehner makes a very important point. If you look at the data, you see that millennials, and we'll see even soon Generation Z, are disconnecting from conservative Christian communities at rates that are higher than previous generations, in part because of a lack of interest, but a lack of confidence that these communities hold the same values that they have professed for years. And one of the reasons why they do that, or they believe that, is because they see in the political sphere what conservative evangelicals are supporting and what they're not supporting. We've seen very recently in another Pew poll that no group supports keeping refugees out of the U.S. at higher rates than conservative white evangelicals. And when you have young voters, millennials being one of the largest voting blocs, who care a lot about these social issues related to immigration and international concerns, they want to see a religious community care as well. And right now, that's not what they see.
You know, Jim Vandehei, this is a dramatic shift. And what's so interesting is what Pete Wehner touches on are evangelical Christians' openness to refugees, who, again, I'm not talking about illegal immigration. I'm talking about refugees, people who can legally seek refugee status. And this is a shift that has gone along with Trump. Their views have bent and gotten actually closer to Donald Trump's. It hasn't gone the other way. And what's so fascinating, as Pete Wehner points out, is we're talking about the core of Jesus's message. Whether you're a believer or not, you read the Gospels, and the core of it is in Matthew 25, where Jesus says, if you want to know whether you're going to go to heaven or not, it's whether you help the poor, whether you help the hungry, that's the core of the message. You can look at the story of the Good Samaritan, things that white evangelicals have been taught their entire lives, and things that they actually were doing when I went over Hurricane Katrina. I saw a lot of evangelical organizations, even before the government was doing their job properly. They were there helping. This is a pretty radical departure.
Yeah, and it shows the danger of when you have a faith, when you have Christianity sort of collide with politics. If you just go back a decade ago and you would have painted the portrait of Donald Trump and you would have told the evangelical community that this is the guy that you're going to be wholeheartedly embracing, people would have said there's no way in hell that could possibly happen. And even Trump in private often remarks with astonishment that Christians are so much his base. Like, his numbers are higher and more intense among evangelical Christians than George Bush's were. And a lot of that, it's all, like, even look at that refugee question. It's because they're viewing that question through a political lens. They see refugees and they think it's a fight over the wall or over immigration. And all of those steps now have become political. And Trump knows this. And he's put a lot of thought into how do I get even higher turnout among evangelical Christians, because he knows he has so much credibility built up with them, largely because of the court, a little bit because of his language, but a lot about the court. A lot of evangelical Christians outside of the cities feel under attack. They disagree with where the country's going on abortion, and they look at what Trump is doing in terms of the two justices he's put on the court, what he said about abortion, and for whatever reason, they then suspend disbelief on a lot of other topics that in the past I don't think a lot of Christians would have tolerated. And by the way, there's still a lot of Christians that don't tolerate this. I think it's a big segment of the older part of the evangelical community.
So, Mike, it's important as we look at that number, 68% saying that there's no responsibility to take care of these immigrants as they cross into the United States, that there are church groups doing incredible work down at the border, evangelical groups down at the border, and have been for many, many years. There are evangelicals who put out an open letter against the Muslim ban. There are people, as Jim said, standing up in the religious community. But that is a political question. That 68% is a defense of Donald Trump, a man many of them have said, look, we elected a president, not a saint, a guy who would stand up for us.
Yeah, Willie, and I think there are many people, I'd include myself in the many people, who know that there are multiple issues on the table in the course of this campaign for the presidency. There is the border, there is the future of NATO, there is the Middle East and things like that. But I think the core of the campaign is what this one man, has done to alter our country. We now have the acceptance of abnormality as a huge underlying issue in this campaign and in everyday American life. I mean, the acceptance of cruelty, the acceptance of misogyny, the acceptance of corruption, both political and moral. And each candidate has an obligation, I would think, to address these issues in some form or fashion, because what happens is that it has altered both the reality of America and the image of America around the world.
And what a bitter, bitter irony that you have a political movement, that you now have a subset of the church, Steve Kornacki, that is so obsessed with the appointment of federal judges over the treatment of young children, worried about the unborn, and seemingly dismissing how children are treated, how infants are treated, how toddlers are treated, how these children along the border are being abused. But there is no doubt, and I know this as someone who grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, there is no doubt that the single motivating factor overriding almost every other factor is the appointment of federal judges. So the appointment of federal judges now, Trump, actually what Jesus writes about in Matthew 25, talks about in the Gospels, about taking care of the poor, the disadvantaged, the hungry, the thirsty.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating for all the reasons that have been pointed out here to try to figure out the relationship between evangelicals and Donald Trump politically and how this alliance ever came to be and what sustains it. And you point to federal judges. And when I've heard that, I've always had the response. I said, well, George W. Bush appointed all sorts of conservative federal judges, too, and yet he wasn't doing necessarily as well with evangelicals as Trump is. And I think that the best explanation from talking to folks about this that I can come up with is I think there's been a broader outside of our politics, there's been a broader shift in our culture over the last, it's a generations long thing, but certainly just since Bush has been president as well, where the culture itself, I think, has grown rapidly more secular, has grown rapidly more liberal in some areas, gay marriage, over the last couple of years, all sorts of different questions there. And I think more and more conservative evangelicals have looked to the courts for protection and for carve-outs when it comes to religious liberty, almost saying the culture is moving so fast in this direction, the courts are what can protect our own liberty. I think that might be what has made that issue so particularly important to evangelical Christians now, even compared to where it was when George W. Bush was president.
Yeah, Susan Page, Tim Carney points out that evangelical has now become a label that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a churchgoer. And evangelicals who attend church regularly vote for Donald Trump in far lower numbers than those who just self-identify as evangelicals.
This trend with white evangelicals did not start with Donald Trump. It was a trend that began before that, although he has certainly exacerbated it. And I think that the main reason that's happened is because of a more singular focus by white evangelicals on the issue of abortion. It's made approach to politics much more transactional. It's made white evangelicals many of them able to say that they don't care about President Trump's personal behavior. They care about his willingness to take whatever steps are necessary to oppose abortion rights. And he has delivered for them in a variety of ways, including, importantly, in his court appointments. One other thing, interesting that in the Pew poll, the most support for taking care of refugees came from people without a religious affiliation. 2/3 of those who say they aren't guided by religion see a responsibility to take care of refugees. I think that is interesting. It goes to the fact that some people see this not as a religious imperative, but as a moral one. And I think that's what we see reflected, a broader American value there with people without a religious affiliation, not one that's affiliated with their particular faith.
Yeah, and that should be shameful, Mika, to those evangelicals saying that they don't have the responsibility to give a cup of water in Jesus' name. All the things, again, that you can read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the things they supposedly were taught their entire life, they are now throwing to the side because of the appointment of federal judges. It's that simple. It is that simple. That is the overriding factor, and it's shameful. As Susan Page said, it didn't just start with Donald Trump. This was also the case with George W. Bush. I've always told you the story of a pastor I knew in Pensacola who had to sit down during the W years and actually tell people in his church that you can be a Christian and still not support George W. Bush. The merger of politics and religion has really infected the church, and it's, of course, the church that's going to pay for it in the long run.
Well, considering the conversation we just had, we throw this story out there for you this morning. The Washington Post reports that this weekend, a Miami area strip club will hold a golf tournament at President Trump's club in Florida, in which golfers can pay for a dancer to serve as their caddy girl while they play. The marketing director for the strip club told the Post that there would be no nudity at the resort and that on the course the caddies would wear pink miniskirts and what he called a sexy white polo. The Trump Organization told the Post that the event is for a worthwhile cause, a Miami children's charity, but said they were not aware that they used the Trump name and family crest in advertisements. Lovely. Jim VandeHei and Susan Page, thank you both. Still to come, the Trump administration gets dealt a new setback in its fight to add a controversial citizenship question to the 2020 census. A federal judge has denied a request to switch up the Justice Department's legal team, but the president isn't done weighing his options. The latest on that court battle ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.